Welcome, everyone, to the Agentic Quality Podcast, and I'm your host, Tatyana Arbouzova. Today, we have with us Deepanjan Bhol, a principal engineering leader who works at Microsoft Dynamics. Welcome, Deepanjan.
Thanks, Tatyana. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Deepanjan, and I work in Microsoft's Dynamic 365 team, which is equivalent to Salesforce for enterprise sales and customer service. My work sits at the intersection of AI agents, AI quality, and AI first business applications. A major part of my work goes towards building sales research agent, which we will be talking about, Tatiana, together. I also lead the eval side of things in our team and also across the org. And we have a small forum where we have presentations across the org where we talk about how, what are the new latest and greatest on the field of eval. So that's about me, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I thank you for that introduction. And can you tell us a bit more what specifically you're building at Microsoft Dynamics?
Yeah, so we are working on this product called Sales Research Agent. Sales Research Agent is one of the key offerings of Microsoft's Dynamic Sales 365, and it just went GA. It has been a couple of months. It has been rolled out all across the world. There are thousands and thousands of enterprises who are starting to use the product. It essentially is a research canvas, and think of any sales leader can come to the research canvas and ask natural language question after they can connect to their own data source. Let's think about in the traditional BI world, if a sales leader would have to ask question like, hey, how is my pipeline coverage looking for last quarter? There would be dashboards and reports, but it would be really hard to get answers to this kind of complicated, ambiguous questions. And they would need a team of data analysts to really go and have a look and calculate this for the sales leader. Our goal is to make the data exploration, the research, extremely easy for the sales leaders so that they can go and ask natural language questions, and we in turn do all the heavy lifting of understanding the schema, and then in looking at the data and then providing rich insights to the sales leader.
And how does AI cursor work?
Yeah, so this goes back to when we were envisaging the product. Essentially, we were given a completely free hand to go and develop an AI first solution. And this was one of the moonshot projects of the org. And think about back in the mobile era, when mobile era came in, everybody started designing different type of apps, which was different from traditional desktop apps. Similarly, when AI era came in, we kind of had to design something which was completely different and take the full leverage of the AI. And so AI cursor is something where the user can point to a visual artifacts on the research canvas, so they can point to a chart, ask pointed question, or they can point to two different charts and ask questions. Uh, and then basically they can ask question in context of those visual artifacts.
Mhm. That sounds like a challenging testing problem. Not only you have to validate the answers that it's giving you, but you also have to validate the visual component that you're pointing to the right thing and you're answering the right question, right? And so what's behind this system? How does it work on the back end?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a sophisticated multi-agent system sitting behind, which is doing all the heavy lifting. Think about uh, we have various agents talking between each other. Gone are those days where you'd have a static orchestration where, of course, you can have a little bit of, like conditional forking, but now gone are those days, and you can really use AI's capability of reasoning and really have different agents talking between each other and produce the final output. So for us, we have different agents. So we have a schema intelligent agent, which basically figures out which tables and columns to use. Then we have a planner agent, which rolls out the plan, which tables and columns to pick up, and which charts to plot. And then we have SQL writer, which writes the SQL, which has all the knowledge of writing SQL. We have a Python engineer, which essentially writes the Python to visualize the charts. And then we have answer critic. Answer critic provides guidance if the result that we're producing is good or not. So that's the power of multi-agent systems, which does much better job than a monolithic solution trying to do the same, because it breaks down the problem into sub-problems.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that we're going to be talking about the test framework that you created to test this. But before you had that framework, how did you approach testing this, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so before we approached that, yeah, a lot of our testing was anecdotal manual testing, and it was, our team had several, I would say, test experts who would go and start testing with their fixed set of test sets. They would upload files. We had a standard set of files or connectors that we would use, fixed set of questions, and that was our way of testing. While that worked really great for development initially, we soon realized that it would become a bottleneck if we have to roll this out to enterprise grade, where the data will be extremely messy. So that's definitely, we started realizing that we will hit bottleneck with this approach.
And what is in your mind the main difference between testing the AI products and testing the traditional products?
Yeah, good question. So the traditional products you can think of will always produce kind of deterministic outputs. It takes in deterministic inputs. It will invariably produce deterministic outputs. Whereas AI, by nature of it, is probabilistic. It's open-ended. It is multidimensional, multimodal. So validating AI is going to be different from traditional systems. So, to give you an example, let's say if somebody asks to our system, a sales leader asks to our system, hey, how is my win rate doing across industries? The result that our system would show them, the charts that our system would show them, would be very different each time, because we might pick up a little bit different query, we might pick up little bit different chart, and so it becomes extremely crucial to evaluate AI systems that you have to make it you have to get your rubrics correct. So you have to have some rubrics, you have to have some pointed, scoped, things that you want to measure it against.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so what made you realize that you needed a structured kind of eval approach?
Yeah, so like I was saying, initially we were doing anecdotal testing. We were testing manually. Well, it was working great with customers to just demo them. When we started working with our partners or enterprises with which we were initially working with, we started realizing their schema is extremely complicated. They have thousands of tables, 500 to 600 of columns in each of the table. And so we had to build some kind of a structured approach to make sure we can measure whether our quality is actually improving over time. The other problem that we were facing up with is the pace of development within the team. In the team, we were touching every layer of our system, whether it's prompt, to whether it is orchestration logic, to the tools, to you name it. And it was extremely difficult for us to know whether we are actually making any improvement. We were even, coming up with different versions of our product, and we didn't know whether, we are really making any meaningful shift towards a positive direction. And that's when we realized there needs to be a structured way to measure all this.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem to solve, that you have to measure the improvement and not just make sure that it still works, right? So that's the
Yeah.
shift, it seems like, from the traditional testing. You have to find a way to measure it. And walk us through, how do you build these benchmarks from scratch when you didn't have any?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so initially when we realized that, we have to put a structured way to evaluate all this, we went out and looked out at what are the benchmarks that are existing outside. And there were some benchmarks there for text to SQL. There were some benchmarks for from partner companies as well, but they were not ambiguous enough. The questions were not ambiguous enough that a sales leader would ask, or the data that they would have and were not complicated enough. And so, we realized that we have to create a benchmark of our own. That's where, we were at that point of time talking to multiple enterprises. We knew what the problems that we were running into, talking to these enterprises, what were the customizations that each of these enterprises were doing to the schema. So we kind of brought those in and we designed like the benchmark. We brought back all of the, nuances into creating the data set. So we created the data set, and then we really talked to all of these enterprise customers, understood what type of questions, a sales leader would ask, whether it's our pipeline coverage to seller coaching to seller performance. We brought those buckets of questions, generated the questions, and generated the SQL behind those, verified within the team, and then, with the question, the SQL, and the answer, that is our eval data set. That's our benchmark, and then we created about 200 of them. So it was a pretty big exercise, but I'm glad that we did that.
And apart from gathering these questions from your customers and asking to different sales leaders, did you validate this data set in any other way?
Yeah, so so what we did was we, of course, first initially went out and made sure that we were capturing the right type of questions that we want to ask. One of the key things for eval is it's garbage in, garbage out. If you are not going to put a lot of effort in making sure that your data set is nuanced enough, in our case, it was very customized, and if you are not sure if the questions that you are asking are relatable or something that sales leader would ask, it would not work. So we took several approaches to make sure, we reviewed this internally within our team to make sure that the sequels we wrote were accurate enough. We made sure that, even when it longer term, initially when we defined the eval data set, we have human reviewers who review, like the SQL. Human reviewers look at the LLM judges that we have set up, uh, uh, and we make sure that the quality of this are, always evolving. It's a constant work. It's not something like you create an eval data set and you create an eval system and you're done. It's, you need a continuous job to keep up and keep improving over time.
Mm-hmm. And so, apart from these 2,000 questions that you created as an evaluation, what else does this framework have?
Yeah. So, the main idea that I like to tell people is that, evaluation is just one part of it. But if you are not being able to get meaningful signals out of the evaluations, if you can't figure out what are your regressions from the evaluations, or if you don't know what things are improving, that it will not help you. So you can run evals as much as you want, but you need to make sure you can extract signals out of it. And so, one of the things that we did within our team, and I spearheaded the effort, is I built a visualization platform which helps people to upload results as they do the evals. They can upload results onto the system, and then they can visualize those results in different ways as they want. I have built a system which a lot of the team, I would say, within our org uses, and they can visualize whether their evals are actually moving, what we call is hill climbing, whether the eval results are hill climbing or is there regressions happening. It helps to compare results. Like, let's say you did an eval run with a certain build a week back, you want to do another eval run, you want to make sure your results are moving upwards. So in addition to defining and doing just evals, you also need to put in effort to make sure you can visualize the results, you can analyze the results,
Uh-huh.
and then create a feedback loop back to your development team.
Hmm.
So
So it's a new dashboard for the test results, right?
right.
The
Yes.
legacy dashboards, they just show pass fail rate, right? And so build
Yes.
over build. So, but
Yes.
here you're showing the eval results, which is the confidence levels from build to build, and
Correct.
it's visualized. So it's not just the 2D, right? So it's a,
Yes. Yes,
uh-huh.
it are, and we also, record the past results. So we generate charts, right? So we record the charts. What did we generate last week to what did we generate now? And if there are regressions, we can see those side by side comparisons as well.
Hmm. And do you have a different evaluator agents, or is it just like one evaluator that runs through all of this?
Yeah, so, you know, we have several evaluator agents, and kind of depends. And the way I approach this is, or I guide people are, you have to think about what value you are offering to customers, and from there you should figure out what you want to really evaluate. For us, charts are front and center of our product, and so for us, evaluating the chart quality is of extreme importance to us. And so we have evaluators, for example, which looks at the charts, like the data that we are showing in the charts. You can have fancy charts, but if the data in it is not correct, then that's of no value. So we look at the chart's groundedness, we look at the chart's visual relevance, whether the chart is meaningful to the user question, whether the chart is too crowded. We have a evaluator for that. We have an evaluator for whether we are picking up the right chart for the right purpose. We look at, we have groundedness, which looks at the textual response, which we have relevance for the textual response. We have schema accuracy, which looks at, hey, are we picking up the right tables in the right columns? Because that's extremely important to us. We really need to make sure that the SQL is correct for us. Explanation evaluation, which is, are we showing really good explanation to the users when we are showing them the answer? Because that's again very important to us. Those are our evaluators.
And do these evaluators also use LLMs, or how do you evaluate
Yes,
it?
yes. So these evaluators also use LLM. A key to that is that these are very scoped and they're very specific evaluators. Thing that I've learned over my span of working with evals, you should make sure that the evals that what rubric you're picking up is extremely simple. Keep it very simple. Saying it is very easy, but doing it is very hard. But keep things very simple. And so our all our judges are LLM based judges, and they evaluate very specific things. Uh, which it is asked to do so. And they all produce numbers which we look at as a whole holistically and figure out whether the quality is improving or regressing.
Hmm. And how do you make sure that these LLMs as the judges, right, don't regress or don't hallucinate? And how do you make sure that that still returns a relevant information for you?
Yeah, yeah, extremely important, right? Because evals are such a critical step. We make sure we run evals to before even we deploy our product, we take it to production, we run evals. So if we make some mistakes, we either ship bad quality or it will result in very bad customer feedback. So it's extremely important that we keep the high bar for the evals. We have a manual vendor team who looks at the results of the evals. They sample a few of the eval responses that these LLM judges produce, and we meet with them every other week or every week to make sure that the evals are actually um, two things actually. So we look at whether the eval rubrics are correct, and we also look at whether the LLM judges are actually doing what it's supposed to do, because this is LLM can hallucinate, so we want to make sure that they are doing its job, and it's a continuous process. We meet with them, we figure out issues, we fix, and then again, idea is at some point we will at least make effort to make the difference between what it's supposed to do and what it is doing.
Hmm. So you have to have a human in the loop, making sure that it still all makes sense. But from your experience, how heavy of a lifting it is to have a human in the loop in this case. So do you find this LLM as a judge is pretty reliable, or how often do you have to say, oh no, this is not working?
Yeah, very nuanced question. Um, I would definitely say that human in the loop is essential. Like the role of humans might change. LLM will still do the evaluation, but human is needed either to define the rubrics, either to define the benchmark, and to define, to calibrate the prompts, to calibrate to do a human review. Or for all of that, human is definitely needed. But at the same time, LLM allows us to scale. LLM is really good if you can put a very focused instruction to do very small work. If you give it a, like that's why, like, if you make the scope of the evaluation extremely broad, um, you know, things that we have all learned is it becomes untrustworthy. You will also
Mhm.
suffer from, people will not trust your system, or even you will find it very hard to evaluate. So LLM can hallucinate, take that into account, but at the same time, if you make sure that the instruction that and thing that is evaluating is extremely small, then it will do a very good job.
Mm-hmm. And do you use the same LLMs for validating the evals and writing the code, or different?
Yeah, so the models are different, right? So the model that we might have in our multi-agent system to produce output might be different from what agents which are evaluating. The harness around those might be again very different. The harness for a multi-agent system is completely different from the harness that does the evaluation. Um, and so uh, can AI, who writes the code, can it also go back and do the same testing? They can, honestly, they can. But at the same time, we have to be making sure that the AI who writes the code, they might have made some assumptions. While testing, we need to make sure that those assumptions are not taken. Uh, Otherwise, there will be like some gaps in all.
So you've used LLM as a judge in this situation for evaluations, and it's a different LLMs that you're using, and you're using multi-agent system for evaluating. So that makes a lot of sense. But what is your perspective on the same developer is writing code and using the same LLM to write the tests for the code that they write? Do you think that does that work?
Yeah, I think that works. You can use your same Copilot, GitHub Copilot CLI or Claude CLI to write the code, to whether you're writing the harness for the product or we're writing the eval test cases. You can definitely use the same CLI. Your assumptions need to be different. You just need to make sure you're not taking the same assumptions with which you wrote the, harness for the product, and then you're writing the same assumptions, you're writing the test, then you will miss some, edge cases and stuff like
Mm.
that. But definitely, you can use your same favorite, CLI to write write
Mm.
the code. That's all
So
right.
what I've heard from developers who used to be testers and can evaluate the tests that the LLM writes, they're saying that LLMs are too agreeable with itself, and so if it writes the code, then it's biased towards the code that it writes. So I've heard about challenges for LLM to disagree with itself, and so some people are saying that you need to almost have a LLM with a different goal and different. It's tell it to disagree with the one that writes the code to make it disagreeable. Otherwise, it just writes the test that agrees with itself.
Yeah, I think you correctly pointed out, like, if you, as long as you put the goal, like even in our multi-agent system, we have planner, we have SQL writer, we have Python engineer, we also have an answer critic. This answer critic actually provides feedback to the multi-agent system, whether the result, whether whatever we are producing is correct or not. So in a sense, it's also doing a little bit of testing override over there inside the multi-agent system.
Yeah.
If you provide it with the correct instructions, same model, it should work. It all goes into how you're calibrating your prompt, what goal you are setting for the LLM. And so
Hmm.
if you do that right, it shouldn't really matter. Like,
Yeah,
LLM,
yeah.
It
Yeah,
should do a pretty good job.
that's a good point. The right goal should be set, even if you're using the same LLM, right? So what is your advice for the teams that are building the eval frameworks? Where should they start? And how do they, build the similar system that you did?
Yeah. So if I were supposed to give them any advice, and I would definitely say that start with what you're offering to customers. Before everything, put everything aside and start there. That will help you understand, what your users can't live without, what will make your user to not trust your output, what are your edge cases, what are your, like scenarios which are risky. If you can figure those out, then that should in turn help you inform or to come up with this evaluation rubrics. And as long as you can form very definitive rubrics, you should be good. The second is, garbage in, garbage out. So you have to put in a huge amount of effort to make sure your evaluation data set is rock solid. It is actually representative of what you will face in production. If you make it very simple, your eval scores will be like, let's say 1900 or whatever, and you will be very happy that it's doing a great job. But actually, when you go out to the market and you ship your product, you will see that it's not the case. So it take a lot of effort in making sure you recognize your rubrics, keep those extremely simple, and then make your eval system as close to the actual world possible.
Hmm. Hmm. And what would you say to the test engineers who are starting to test these kind of systems? What kind of skills they would translate into this AI world?
Yeah, I think, for testers or QA engineers, the next this is an extremely crucial time. AI eval is one of the most, if not the most important pillars of agentic systems. I can even argue that agentic systems are as good as evals you have in place, because if you don't have a good eval in place, your all responses going to be all over the place. Now, coming back to QA engineers, they will have skills like skepticism, curiosity, ability to find edge cases. Those are golden, like those are extremely easy to carry over onto the AI world. It's just the tooling is changing. It's just instead of deterministic outputs, you're going to, evaluate something which is non-deterministic. But that's about it. The main job of a QA used to be, hey, I want to make sure that the product before it lands to customer is evaluated properly. It's of high quality. So that is not going away. The only thing that's changing is the tooling and the perspective and the mindset.
And I wanna ask you a controversial question that is out there. So, do you think we need more testers or less testers with AI?
I honestly think that, AI is pumping in so much amount of code that, it's almost like everybody is starting to write a lot of code on their own. So definitely there needs to be some amount of testing which needs to be done for all of this code. If all of this code needs to be hitting production, as the velocity of our, like just shipping increases, as the velocity of amount of changes that we can make is increasing, we definitely need to make sure we are getting there in terms of how much we are able to test. So there's no question about how much we need to test will definitely increase. Now, whether like that translates to the number of testers increasing, I can't comment on that, but definitely like the amount of testing that needs to be done will definitely increase a lot. Testers at least needs to be really savvy with the way they're testing and how they're testing to make themselves useful so that they can test more and more stuff out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to hear. I think our audience would love to hear that. And I definitely think that the critical thinking and analyzing the systems and system thinking is very important, right? As you
Yeah.
pointed out, as we develop so much code so much faster. So someone has to do it, be it developers or testers. And testers are historically very good at it. So
Yep.
I think there will still be a lot of work for us in this AI world. And where can people find you if they want to connect, or is there any articles you can point us to that you have?
Yeah, so you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and try to keep myself up to date. And you can of course reach out to me via that. I also have published a recent paper on our work on sales research agent, which is available both in Microsoft's blog and also in archive, which is we have a published paper around that, which is called sales research agent and sales research bench. So if you're interested to learn more about what we have done, definitely check it out.
Sounds great. And Deepanjan is going to be our speaker at Innovate QA on June 4 5, and he's going to tell us in more detail about his framework
Yes,
and how it works. So definitely join us there. It's going to happen in Bellevue on June 4 5. Thank you, Deepanjan, for your time today and sharing your experience with us. I think this is very valuable for people who are trying to do similar things in their products, and for testers and for developers who are trying to evaluate and figure out how to test their products. So thank you for sharing your experience with us.
sure. Thank you for having me.